Okay, so Rhett, there's a lot of times I'll walk in to mix at a church and I'll do everything that we've done so far. I'll do gain structure. I'll get my everything ready, my console set up, and I'll do all of my normal preparations and push up the drums, and they just sound terrible. They sound like someone's banging on Tupperware boxes upside down. And I don't know, really, sometimes I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know if it's the drummer's job. I don't know what to do. I just know it doesn't sound well. Can you speak into that a little bit?
So I would say if you're unsure of the drummer's ability to tune and get the drums sounding good, give them the benefit of a doubt, see how they do. Always having open conversation. If you feel like the drums aren't sounding good, say, hey, could you tweak these? And if you're still not getting the sound you want and you don't know, some common problems with, drum kits and being attitude, not having a good sound is the resonant head, which is the bottom side of the drum. A lot of times drum kits still have stock heads on it, or they'll just be so out of tune that there's no tone, and 90% of a drum's tone comes from the resonant side, and most of the feel comes from the batter side. So obviously both heads are going to work together, but if your resonant side is out of tune or it's just a bad quality head, you're not going to get a good sound out of the drum, and you're also not getting the shell itself to activate its sound. So it's really important that you check that resonant side and kind of go from there. Now on the flip side of that, I'll come across a lot of drum kits where the batter side head is either completely out of tune, your lugs are loose, they're not even finger tight, or you'll see wrinkles. And sometimes wrinkles are okay and you can get a good sound out of that, but kind of like what I said with the resonant side, if the batter isn't tuned to a certain tightness or degree of tightness, it's not going to get the shell to activate. So it's really important to check just how loose or tight something is and kind of go from there.
And honestly, new heads, keeping everything clean. There's a long list of just best practices. I've taken bottom hoops off before, and there's been sawdust all in the bottom of the hoop. I can't imagine that helps the resonance of that bottom head to do its job.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can affect the bearing edge and just how the drum head sits on the drum, and the bearing edge is, a big part of a drum sound too, just because that is the part of the drum that's in contact with the head, right? So whenever you hit a drum, that vibration goes to the edge and it's interacting with the bearing edge. So sawdust can definitely affect that for sure.
And I'm not a qualified person to walk up to a drum kit and do the job. However, I know lots of qualified people. So if I'm not qualified and we agree that maybe the person on the other side is not that qualified, we know we can always call in experts to tune the kit, put new heads on, teach us best practices. It's very much worth the investment to get it done right and to keep it done right, not just to get it done once and let it sit for 6 months untouched and out of tune and Tupperware again.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things too where there's just so many variables, quality of your instrument, of the mics, what kind of room you're in. Are you behind a shield? What's the drum made of? What kind of wood is it? Where are the bearing edges? What type of heads are you using? Are they coated or clear? How many plies? There's just so many things.
Temperature and humidity in the room.
Yeah. I mean, the possibilities are endless because it's a fully acoustic instrument. So I can't say that there's one set formula for getting a sound, but there are best practices. And I think that getting an expert in, if it's once or 5 times or once every quarter, just to kind of help teach some of those general best practices goes a long way.
Right. Are there any specific elements that you would suggest? I mean, kick drum, tom, snare, anything that you've come across that would be a great solution for people to use?
If you ever come across any drum, kick, tom, snare, and it's either so loose you can't get a good sound out of it, or you've tried working on it, you've tried finding problem lugs and problem areas on the drum and just can't seem to get a good sound, I recommend just taking a drum key, loosening every single lug, and then going around every single lug again and getting everything finger tight. And then from there, making really small incremental changes, either quarter turns or half turns at the most, but more often than not, it's like really small incremental changes that'll help with the sound.
What about kick drum?
So with kick drums in worship music, a lot of guys use bigger kicks. You know, they're not using 20-inch kick drums most of the time. It's 22, 24, 26. So with that, the diameter is a lot bigger. You know, more surface tension is needed. So a common problem I see is that the batter head is so loose, it's not activating the shell of the drum. Like I said earlier, you're not getting much tone out of the drum. You're getting like that thud and that slap. But to get the most out of your drum, you actually need to overcompensate for that and kind of tighten the batter side more.
That's great with the kick. Now, the snare is like a thing that's really important to me, of course. And I feel like sometimes a drummer will walk in and like something that's really tight, really high pitched. And for that moment, I feel like I need it nice and beefy, a little bit more low. Obviously, it's both of our jobs to fit in to what the church wants, the
Sure.
worship team, worship leader. Do you ever have those kind of battles where, you know, front of house guy wants something different? You walk in and you're like, no, I really feel it like this. I've been practicing like this. And then how do you deal with that with the sound guy?
Yeah, I have that happen all the time just because a lot of times I like to have a high crack snare sound, you know, but a lot of the times, especially nowadays, the genre calls for lower tuned snare drums with like that gushy snare sound from the snare bed and snare wires. And so I definitely think that there's middle ground, you know, if you want to take the tuning down a little bit, incremental changes like we've talked about. Another really easy way, if you're someone like me that likes a high-pitched snare, you know, I have this mute ring that I can place on my snare drum. And instead of having to retune my entire drum, you can just loosen these two bottom lugs and you can do a half turn on each one. And if you do that, you can get your snare down to a really low, kind of thuddy sound. And then if you have a song in the set where it calls for a higher pitched snare, all you have to do is tune those two lugs back up.
Yeah.
So it's a quick and dirty kind of cheat.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I cheat on the console as well sometimes where I'm like, I know it's what makes you comfortable. So I'll kind of tweak over here on the EQ and not bother you because, again, I want to amplify you as a comfortable player. So there's always a give and take between us. I think it's great that we're both really flexible to kind of do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the open communication, just making that known, either, you know, I'm compensating by changing my tuning a little bit, or like you said, using what you have at the board to kind of help with that too. I think that's really important.